Well, welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Mark Findlay Smith, author of the novel What He Never Said. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Pleased to be here.
Well, if someone hasn't yet heard about your novel, What He Never Said, how would you describe the novel?
Well, I think it's inspired by some classic crime. It's set just after the First World War, in the days and weeks after that disaster. And there's a soldier who's returned from the front, and he is interested in the death of a friend of his, what has happened. And he was also involved with someone else who may or may not have fought at the front. We don't know. So it's set early 20th century, and it's inspired a little by some of the vibe of classic crime. So early Christie, that kind of thing, but with different themes to those books.
And so do you remember the original idea or impetus that led you to write What He Never Said?
Well, there were a couple of things. I'm very interested in the First World War, and I've read a lot of First World War literature, Pat Barker trilogy, Regeneration trilogy. I don't know if you know that one. It's superb. So I'm interested in that. I've been obsessed with Christie since I was about 10, Agatha Christie. So I wanted to write a book that had a good twist at the end. I kind of, what? They did it? That kind of feel. But also, my mother had told me about an old school friend of mine who had died in, he died in a he was hit by a car on the street, and I hadn't heard about this, and I started to think, well, I wonder what would happen if he hadn't died, or if something else had happened. We saw him hit by a car, but maybe something else happened. So all of those things came together in my head a bit, and the book was the result.
Well, as you explained, your novel is a historical crime novel set after the First World War. I'm curious, what type of research did you do for the novel? And did you know about the conscientious objectors that you write about before you started researching the book?
I did. I went to a place called, I don't know if you've heard of it, called Craig Lockhart in Edinburgh. I live in Scotland. And Craig Lockhart was a hospital. Maybe hospital is not quite the right word. It was a place where conscientious objectors or people who were suffering from shell shock or were otherwise not at the front for various reasons were sent. And, this was the early days of our understanding of shell shock and what war, particularly the First World War, could do to people's bodies and minds. So I went there and just walked around the corridors and looked in the rooms where Wilfred Owen, the poet, and Siegfried Sassoon, the writer, who famously threw his medal into the sea, that's where they were sent to be treated. So in some ways it was a pretty brutal place, but in others it was the beginnings of an emergence of understanding what was happening to these guys. So I did that was a lot of my research, but also with conscientious objectors. I'm a journalist, I write for the Herald. I interviewed the daughter of a conscientious objector. It was the Second World War, not the First, but that really interested me. He was called Tom Burns, and he refused to fight in the Second World War, but he did serve as an ambulance driver and got into some pretty hairy situations. And his daughter, Lucy, I sat down with her, and what impressed me was her pride in her father. She was very proud of what he did. She was very proud of his decision. And also it was interesting because there were lots of different motivations among the men and some women who refused to take part. Some were socialists, some were pure pacifists, some were anti-nationalists. So it was sitting down with Lucy and talking to her and realizing that these people were dismissed, punished, and sometimes shot or imprisoned during the First World War, and less to a lesser extent the Second World War. And I thought, right, okay, what did they go through? So one of my characters, Harry, goes through a bit of that in the book. A lot of prejudice, a lot of name calling, and it was difficult for them. During the war and afterwards because the prejudice lingered. So yeah, bit of research. Craig Lockhart is a really interesting place in Edinburgh. Look it up.
That's great. Well, what was your writing journey that led you to writing this novel?
Well, I've written journalism since my early 20s, but I've dabbled in short stories first. So I won a couple of short story competitions, and that didn't seem quite so daunting. They were both science fiction, actually. I'm a big science fiction fan. But also history. So there was a short story inspired by Ernest Shackleton, the explorer, and the story was kind of loosely based on a character, a real person who was on his ship. And the second one was inspired by Doctor Who, and was in a book of Doctor Who short stories. For people who don't know, Doctor Who is a British science fiction series. And so there was that. And then I think, like most of the novelists you've interviewed, there are many, many failed, rubbish, not very good novels in the bottom drawer. So I think I wrote, there's at least two that were written that I thought were groundbreaking and astonishing at the time. Sent off, agents didn't agree, and they were right. So I think What He Never Said is at least the third novel I've written, and the editing process was astonishing as well. So I sent it off thinking, again, this is excellent. And the editor said, I disagree. And there was lots and lots of rewriting, which made it better, particularly the beginning, the first crucial chapter. So yeah, it's been a long journey. I'm in my 50s now. And I've probably been writing since I was a boy, since I was a kid. And this is the first published novel. So long and arduous.
So are you working on a new novel now?
Yes, I've got a second one planned. I've got the idea sketched out, and what I've always wanted to do, again, as a kind of homage to Christie, I wanted to do a murder on a train. So this one, it's the same character as my detective, who's called the Silent Detective, because he doesn't say very much. He has shell shock, and his kind of Watson character, Harry. They're on a train, and there's a commotion from the carriage next door. They rush the carriage. The carriage is bloodied. There's a body on the ground. There's a man crouching over him. He says, "I didn't do it," and then jumps from the train. So that's the premise. I really wanted to do a old school train mystery. How did the murder happen? How did the guy get off the train? Orient Express style. But I like to explore modern themes. So my characters are struggling with their sexuality, which this is by the second novel, it's the 1920s. So it's difficult for them in that respect. So yeah, so it's got an old school structure with some modern stuff going on in it. But yeah, the second one is I haven't actually written any words yet.
Hi, this is Jeff, the host of the Reading and Writing podcast. I wanted to tell you about an app that can change how you plan parties and celebrations at your home. Drizzly. Drizzly is the most convenient way to buy beer, wine, and spirits, with delivery to your doorstep in under 60 minutes. Are you hosting a book club party and you need a couple of bottles of wine? Well, keep in mind Drizzly. Or do you and your friends make cocktails based on your favorite book characters or novels? If so, again, use Drizzly. That's DRIZLY.com. Drizzly is the #1 app for alcohol delivery. Again, that's Drizzly, DRIZLY.com. And right now, if you act, Drizzly is giving every new customer $5 off their first order. Just use the promo code FAST5 at checkout.
Hi, I'm Flo from Progressive. Being a baseball fanatic like me can be stressful. It's not all sports points and touchdowns. So Progressive is going to help you take your mind off your team for a moment. Instead of thinking about how they missed that gold point score, think about the Name Your Price tool from Progressive letting you choose coverage options based on your budget, unlike your team that missed the end zone net area. Well, anyway, hope this distraction about Progressive's Name Your Price tool was helpful. It sure kept me from thinking about all those penalty balls. Yay, sports!
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
That's great. Well, what was your writing process when you were working on this novel? Did you outline the novel extensively, or was it more instinctual and you just dive into the narrative?
That's a really interesting question. A few people have asked me that. I had the central idea. So I had the central idea of the murder and who did it. And then I just started. I thought I need a strong first chapter. So I started out with that. And then the structure changed. I was amazed. I know there are some writers who work to a strict structure. I didn't. Characters started to emerge that I had no idea of at the start. The structure changed. Ideas changed. So the only structure was trying to sit down and write at least 1,500 words a day. But other than that, it changed quite a lot. And there were a lot of agonizing late nights where I thought, how do I get from point D to point E? So it was a growing process rather than a structured process, and quite a painful process as well. So the second one, again, I know the murder and who did it, but that's it. And I've got an idea of some central characters, but yeah.
That's great. Well, what writing advice would you offer for those who are working on their own stories and novels?
Well, that's a hard one. I would say keep going. I would say look for competitions. They were really helpful. A focus. So I looked for competitions and deadlines because they really helped. So working in your room on your own, thinking I'm one day going to send this to an agent, that is really hard. So have a look out there for competition. So the first short story I had published was a call at a competition. And I was one of the runners up, and they published it. And the second time was also a competition called SFX, writing competition. So that helped. That helped a lot, having a kind of focus, and having a target. So that would be my advice. Start with short stories, because if it hasn't worked out, well, you haven't spent a year writing it. You've maybe spent a few weeks. And then when you get into the novel, try and have some kind of structure, maybe a word target per day. And then I can't remember who said writing is rewriting, but that is very, very true. So when my novel went through, I would say probably hundreds of drafts. The first chapter, possibly thousands of drafts. So put it in and then other writers have probably said this, put it away for a little while and then come back to it. The effect of that is amazing. Something you think is good, something you think will win you prizes, put it in a drawer for a month, ideally 6 months, come back and you think, what was I thinking? You come at it a little objectively, a little more fresh eyes. So have a look for magazines, competitions, people who are actively looking for writing, and go there first.
That's great. Well, what novels or nonfiction books have you read recently that you enjoyed?
Well, I've been reading some of the gay fiction that I mentioned from the 1940s, because my novel features gay characters in the 1920s. I thought, right, okay, what was going on then? So I read an American novel called The Fall of Valor by Charles Jackson, written in the 1940s. Not very well known now, but very, very good. And it's about a man who falls in love with another man. And as usual in novels with gay characters, it doesn't end well. It reminds me of City of the Pillar by Gore Vidal, if you know that one. I've been reading some classic crime. I've just finished a Niall Marsh. Niall Marsh is less well known than Agatha Christie, but from that period, she was writing from the 30s till the 1980s, I think. And I'm always reading something about the First World War. So I read a non-fiction book recently, which I thoroughly recommend, called 6 Weeks by John Lewis Stemple, British writer. Really, really good. I think he's a farmer, so he sometimes writes about animals. He wrote a book about animals on the Western Front, which was just superb. But 6 Weeks is about the experiences of officers on the Western Front during the First World War. And the 6 weeks refers to their average life expectancy, amazingly. A young officer in the First World War would go out there and would probably be dead within 2 months. And so that was really, really good. John Lewis Stemple.
Wow. Well, where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you and your novel?
Well, I'm on Twitter at Mark Findlay Smith, Findlay with a D. You can also look for some of my journalism on the Herald, heraldscotland.com. You can buy the book on Amazon. And you just Google Mark Smith, What He Never Said, and you should have some information come up there. I've written about some of these things. I wrote an interview with the daughter of the conscientious objector I talked about. You can find that online. And my short stories, unfortunately, not. But yeah, so Google.
That's great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Mark Findlay Smith, author of the novel What He Never Said. The novel is available now, so go buy a copy. And Mark, thanks for doing this interview.
Thank you, Jeff. Really good to talk to you. I appreciate it.
Great.
Hi, I'm Flo from Progressive. Being a baseball fanatic like me can be stressful. It's not all sports points and touchdowns. So Progressive is going to help you take your mind off your team for a moment. Instead of thinking about how they missed that goal point score, think about the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, letting you choose coverage options based on your budget, unlike your team that missed the end zone net area. Well, anyway, hope this distraction about Progressive's Name Your Price tool was helpful. It sure kept me from thinking about all those penalty balls. Yay, sports!
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.